I'm going to get us started here. Thank you everyone for being with us today. This is our fourth webinar in the Forgotten Foundations of Fundraising series. So far this year, we've covered foundations, capital campaigns, and direct response. And today we'll be discussing major gifts. If this is your first time joining us for a webinar, I'm Austin Detweiler. I'm the managing editor of Philanthropy Daily. We're hosting this webinar series with American Philanthropic to get to the heart of successful fundraising. Our mission at Philanthropy Daily is to promote the art of civic association. And so a key part of that is strengthening nonprofits, helping fundraisers succeed in their work so that you all can grow the organizations that are essential to a healthy civil society. If you're not yet a reader, I hope you'll make your way over to philanthropydaily.com after this webinar. You can sign up for a newsletter. You can click around. There's plenty of free and very valuable advice there to help you in your work. And you can find our thoughts on philanthropy and civil society as well. If you have any questions, thoughts, please share them with us. There's comments at the end of each article, but you can always reach out to me with ideas, concerns, recommendations. I'd love to hear from you. I should mention too that season 3 of our podcast, Givers, Doers, and Thinkers, will be releasing later this year. So if you're behind on seasons 1 and 2, you can catch up now. You'll hear Jeremy Beer sit down with some of the most interesting people working in or thinking about civil society in America today. So the philanthropists, the nonprofit leaders, scholars, anyone focused on how we build this third space between the individual and the government. But today we're here to talk about major gifts, fundraising, and mastering the art of the ask. For most organizations, major gifts, however you define that, it could be $1,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 for you. Wherever it is, major gifts is going to make up the majority of your contributions revenue. So donor meetings and donor asks are the most important aspect of your development program. That's not to say that other activities are unimportant or insignificant, but major gifts tends to suck up a lot of air when we're thinking about development strategy, and rightly so. This fact is only getting more extreme. You've probably heard of the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of donations come from 20% of donors. Increasingly, you're seeing this look like 90-10 or 95-5. We talked about this on the Capital Campaigns webinar, especially. Whatever you want to offer as an explanation for this trend, it could be wealth inequality, it could be our thinning civil society, maybe it's an underinvestment in direct mail or a bad mid-level donor program. Whatever the explanation is, the trend's real. And so knowing how to identify, engage, renew, and upgrade major donors is of paramount importance. So for that, today we have Cecilia Deem and Sarah Moore with us today. Before I move on to introductions, let me say, please send in your questions at any time using the chat box and the Q&A function. If you toggle your mouse over your Zoom screen, you'll see both of those options down at the bottom. Your questions will come straight to me. So after Cecilia and Sarah give us their opening thoughts, we'll go into Q&A. And I really want to make sure we answer whatever's on your mind related to major gifts. With that, I'm going to introduce Cecilia and Sarah. Cecilia is a managing consultant with American Philanthropic, leading a general services consulting group based on the East Coast. She's been with American Philanthropic since 2019, and before that held positions at the Philanthropy Roundtable, Americans for Prosperity, and the National Museum of Women in the Arts. Her experience spans foundations and major gifts fundraising, development operations, membership programs, and team and transition management. As a fundraiser, Cecilia's built, directed, and expanded multiple grants and foundation programs. I've seen a lot of these, Cecilia do a lot of these. She's run successful major gifts fundraising programs herself, and she's worked hard to streamline development operations at several organizations. Celia is a graduate of Mary Baldwin Women's College, where she studied art management and painting, which is a very common preparation for becoming a fundraiser. She currently lives in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, with her husband and children. And along with Celia, of course, we have Sarah Moore. Sarah works with philanthropists and business leaders across the country, helping direct their generosity to accomplish the social good they seek. She also works with nonprofit leaders to help them grow their opportunities and influence through coaching. And she holds a position at American Private Radio in both development and storytelling. On top of all that, she managed to find an hour to spend with us today. So thank you. Sarah grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, the oldest of 6 kids. She went to Wheaton College and studied political science. And after that, of course, moved to Washington, D.C., where political science happens. She had an internship at the Charles Koch Foundation that led to major gifts work in Americans for Prosperity. She made her way all the way up to vice president of development at AFP, and left in 2017 to launch her own consulting firm with a focus on executive coaching and development training, and naturally to begin studying for her level 2 sommelier exam. I'm curious if that was finished and where we are in that process. After Sarah began working in radio with Our American Stories, she moved to Oxford, Mississippi early in 2020. Difficult time to move, I'm sure. And then married and adopted her husband's 4 children, with a 5th on the way. Sarah is a board member at the Theopolis Institute, a really exciting group that teaches men and women to lead cultural renewal by renewing the church. With that, Sarah, I'm going to hand it off to you to get us started with all of the important stuff.
Fabulous. Well, thanks so much, Austin. It's wonderful to be here today with you all. Very grateful to be a part of this. And Celia, it's always fun to spend some time with you. So looking forward to our discussion this afternoon. I think the place where it feels most comfortable hopping in would be to provide a little bit more context. I see we've already got a question in the queue about, our age and our experience and the type of donors that we might work with. My background, I was not looking to get into fundraising. I was actually trying to avoid it at all costs. I wanted to be a policy analyst, believe it or not, and ended up interviewing at Americans for Prosperity, where Cecilia was actually a part of the interview process. And by some reason, by some fortunate circumstance, they brought me onto the team. And again, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I began as a development associate working for about 7 major gift officers and helping to support the VP of development at the time. His name is JP DeGance, and he remains a development mentor to both Cecilia and I. He's a great development mind, one of the best in the country. And it was incredible to work for him for a short period of time. Cecilia and I made a commitment to try to make this not the most boring thing in the world. So we wanted to kind of, throughout our conversation with you, bring in and highlight a couple of stories that either share with you a lesson learned through a failure or bring some comedic relief to the trials and tribulations of being a fundraiser. In my first 2 weeks of the job, the database guru at the time lost $1 million check. Cecilia and I got to know one another by searching for said $1 million check. If I mentioned the name of the donor behind it, you would all know immediately who it was. But this gentleman who lost the check ended up getting fired. Cecilia was the one who found the check. And so there was much celebration to be had. But after that point in time, this gentleman was fired and I was moved to run the database, something I knew nothing about. But it was a very important way to get involved in the major gifts process because I learned development from the bottom up. I've been pulling lists for, a number of different development officers, felt like a full-time mail house, was working probably 6 full days a week, and picking up these fundraisers, dry cleaning, even those sorts of things, and then managing a database. So I went to bed reading the Razor's Edge manual every single night. I digress. Long story short, that was a baptism by fire experience. Becoming a fundraiser was a baptism by fire experience, not something I wanted to do. They asked me to step into that role right after 2012 happened, which was a challenging time to be picking up the phone, cold calling, prospecting, building out a list. And so I learned to become a fundraiser by hearing no to a great degree every single day. As the youngest person on the team, I made a commitment to have 10 donor meetings for every 1 donor meeting that another fundraiser had. For me at that time, when I was young, it was a numbers game and a hustle game. And I think to a large extent, fundraising is always that. A lot more than that, of course, but it is a numbers game. And so learned how to handle rejection, a lot of it, built out a portfolio by the grace of God. In my first year, I want to say a couple million, and then eventually hit 10 million. And about that time was when they invited me to start managing the development team. Cecilia and I had a chance to work together. And again, I'll make a longer story short, but managing that team at that level with that kind of an annual budget that of course flexes depending on the season or the election cycle or what's going on policy wise. But it was a lot of responsibility at a young age. And for that reason, I began working with a coach on the daily and read just about every fundraising sales book out there, which helped to shape kind of my philosophy for Major Gifts fundraising, which is that, yes, we can dive into the traditional historical train of thought, but more than anything else, it has to be high performance, and we ought to stay up on the sales world, private sector trends. Otherwise, we're going to get increasingly further behind by applying the same old tactics and techniques without any growth. To that end, I also believe that fundraising is about the degree to which you yourself are willing to grow as a leader and grow in your self-awareness, learning from your failures, that sort of thing, which is why once I left Coke in 2017, the executive coaching piece that I started in the consulting form happened first before the development coaching began. And I think that's probably a key part of what each of you have encountered as you've grown into your Major Gifts experience. And then last, and I'll leave you with this, my philosophy for fundraising has a lot to do with living into a broker type role or, a philanthropic consultant role, as opposed to being a single sales rep and pushing one product all the time. That doesn't mean you have to represent a lot of different groups to do that. It simply means that there are times where you earn a donor's trust, when you demonstrate integrity and your commitment to it, when you're willing to say, hey, after exploring this opportunity with you, I realized we're probably not the right group for you. So I'm going to direct you towards these folks instead. So I'm a firm believer in those kind of three major pieces. I'm sure we'll dig into the, weeds here and there on a number of different issues, from, confidence in making the ask in donor meetings to the role of intuition in a donor meeting, versus formula and certain techniques. But with that, I'll turn it over to you, Seals.
Thanks, Sarah. That was great. You hit on a couple of things that we brought up in last week's Scotch Talk, week before last, maybe. Let's say a couple of weeks ago. But that was great. Thank you, Sarah. We're so glad that you're here with us. Looking forward to hearing more from you. I want to just quickly say, I know that there are some comments and questions coming in, and I am the world's worst multitasker. So I am, just so everyone knows, I am not looking at those. I think Austin's going to be kind of keeping an eye on that, and anything that we don't get to, he will respond to, or one of us will follow up with you to make sure that your questions get answered. So I want to, Austin touched on this, and I'll keep my introduction here very brief, but why do major gifts matter? As Austin pointed out, it matters because it's over half of every organization's development. I mean, every nonprofit over $100,000, more than 50% on average of their donations are coming in. And what's interesting is the larger your organization, so if you're over 10 million, or if you're less than 500,000, that number climbs up to over 70%. For organizations that are in the 10 million plus category, it's 77% of their revenue on average is coming from individual donors. And it's interesting to think about why that is, and a lot of thoughts on that could be gone into. One thing to keep in mind about individuals is that an added bonus of pursuing a strong major gift strategy is that you are also opening yourself up for a really strong planned givings program. And if you started a planned giving program today, you're not going to benefit from it tomorrow. But you will in 30 years. And there are huge policy organizations out there in DC, and things like symphonies and heaven, I can't even imagine, universities where it's a massive part of their budget every year, knowing that they're going to be getting bequests, millions of dollars annually that they know will come in because previous generations of fundraisers did a good job cultivating, stewarding, and soliciting those major gifts. So something else to think about, so realizing that major gifts are important, however you define those, $500, $1,000, whatever your major gift threshold is, realizing those are important. Okay, yes, I accept that. How do I get major gifts? Well, forgive me for being obvious, but by asking. That's the number one thing, which is why we're going to try to focus this webinar on how to ask. What is it that makes a good ask? But it's not just asking. The cultivation that comes after the ask is equally important, if not more important. Again, something that's interesting, and I should mention this information that I'm spewing at you, by the way, where I'm getting this out of our organization, American Philanthropic. Every other year, we do a fundraising survey of over 100 organizations, between 120 and 150, all of them with budgets of $100,000 or more, and we assess their fundraising performance. And then create averages for the different levels, and that's where our information is coming from. So this is, I'm not imagining this. This is, in fact, we have compiled this information, and stay tuned, because we're compiling our 2021 report as we speak, or will be shortly, and that'll be coming out, and it'll be really interesting to see the trends for 2020 coming out in that. But anyway, so that's where this intel is coming from. So it's really important to ask for the gifts. It's really important to cultivate the gifts. And I will just very briefly here talk about what's the right way to ask, something we call donor response theory, or a terrible abbreviation, DIRT. And the theory here is that you can assess how strong your solicitations are by thinking through what emotion they are intended to evoke in the recipient. Or what response, right? So for example, if you are sending an email campaign that says, please help us, if you don't give us $5 right now, 6 puppies are going to die in the next, week. The emotion that you are trying to evoke is guilt. You are trying to get people to give to you because they feel, oh no, I'm the only person who can save those 6 puppies. This is terrible. I don't want that on my, they don't want that bloodshed on their head. So they're going to give to you out of a sense of guilt or obligation. The next message might be, hey, we really want you to, and the next level up would be, we want you to lend a hand. Well, asking someone to lend a hand, you're trying to activate their feelings of empathy. Asking someone to invest in your work, you're trying to activate their own self-interest, right? By investing in us, you're actually going to benefit. And this works, by the way, I want to say this works really well, depending on what kind of an organization you are. There are transactional relationships in philanthropy, but you need to acknowledge that money that you get from that is transactional. If you are activating your donor's self-interest, you are failing to activate the most successful and the best relationship that you can have, which is getting the donor to actually identify with you, to see themselves in your work. And that's the messages of those kinds of solicitations are, we want you to be a part of this community. We want you to be a part of this movement. This is who we are, and we think this is who you are. And when the donor reads that and says, oh my gosh, or, ideally you're having a conversation in a meeting and says, that is who I am. And I think the most powerful example that I can speak to of this just from real life is, the Koch brothers used to, and maybe still do, I'm not sure, host these large gatherings for philanthropists. And they were, kind of at the end of the meetings, people would go around the room and stand up and pledge on site how much they wanted to commit. And oftentimes, obviously, people would pledge, but there were also people would stand up and talk a little bit about why they were pledging. And I remember one individual who stood up and with tears in her eyes said, I finally feel like I found my tribe. And that is what you are looking for. You are trying to get your donors to the point where that when they come and sit down with you and your leadership and the people at your organization, they suddenly feel like they've found that group of people that they've always been looking for, who cares about the mission as much as they do. And I could, there's a lot more to donor response theory, but I will just leave it very simply at that. Think about the emotion that you're trying to activate. And the very best one, the response you want from your donors is where they see themselves in your work and they think that's the thing that I need to be a part of. So I will stop there. I would also just say donor response theory does apply to foundations fundraising. Since you all know I love foundations more than most things, it's my jam. This is also true for foundations. Foundations are people too. We always say that at AmPhil, which they are. They do consist of people. So with that, I will spare you the rest of my notes here and kick it over to Austin to see if he has any questions for us or if there's anything coming in from our listeners today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Celia. Thanks, Sarah. We have some good questions coming in here. Do either of you have thoughts off the top of your head? What are some good books for fundraisers to read?
Yeah, I think the Artful Journey is a must. I've always used it more as a reference guide and found that helpful just for rhetoric. And he gives a lot of case studies that you can go through. And I found that simulating donor meetings with a coach is incredibly helpful. Bill Sturdivant is the author. Also, The Challenge Sell, it was a sales book that probably came out 8 years ago now. To Sell is Human by Dan Pink. It just goes through so much of fundraising like sales. And again, they're not the same thing. But both have to do so much with psychology. I think to learn how to empathize better, listen better, a lot of that literature helps you think through what's going on in the consciousness of the donor, and orients you towards a very customer service type method of engaging.
That's great. Yeah, I don't know that I have much to add to that. I always recommend Bill Sturdivant for people who are breaking into the field. If you're new to development, read it. It's kind of it's exactly what Sarah said. It's a guide. It's your reference book. Like, go back to that if you're not sure what your next step should be. And then again, I'm going to have to prey upon all of your patience again and say that this right here, our fundraising survey is awesome. The fundraising performance survey takes the data and tells you where to spend your time. And part of, if you're a small development shop, there's an almost unlimited number of things you could do to raise money. And you can actually look at the data there and see, okay, based on this, I should really focus on these 3 things right now, given the size of my organization and where I want to go. And the new one's coming out. So don't get this one, wait for the new one. But
I'll add to the title of our webinar series, Forgotten Foundations and Fundraising, was stolen straight from a book by American Philanthropics founders Jeremy Beer and Jeffrey Kane. So that's called The Forgotten Foundations of Fundraising. I'm sending in the chat box right now, although I sent it to the wrong people. But we have a couple chapters available for free on Philanthropy Daily. So I'll send that to everybody. And the one that I'm going to send out is about donor response theory. That's that chapter. So you can read that. If you're interested, you can order the whole book. What's another one here? Could you guys tell us what makes a good major gift officer? What do you think are the most important qualities of a good fundraiser?
Yeah, I'll start with this one. We did touch on this a little bit a few weeks ago on the Scotch Talk. I would say the number one thing is just being normal. And by that, I mean, having like good emotional intelligence. And I would even add on to that, having situational awareness. So you need to both be able to read people's emotions and read a room of people's emotions, which is kind of 2 different things, right? Figure out, okay, who's really making the decision here. You want to be able to sit down with the husband and wife and be able to figure out which of them actually controls the checkbook, right? That's a really important part of fundraising. And then I would say the other attribute, I think, is persistence, because like Sarah said, you get no a lot and you have to come to terms with that and not let it deter you from continuing to try. And yeah, I don't know. Sarah, what would you say?
I'd say character is one of the most important characteristics. That, humility is tough to feign, and humility requires an understanding of what true authority is and what true empathy is. And this is, I think, pulled from Andy Crouch, another great author that I would highly recommend. But he talks about the relationship between authority and empathy. Sometimes we think that slapping on a fancy development title might be what gets us the meeting in the first place. But once you're in a room with a high level donor, you can't hide behind that title. And authority is something that is earned, not given. I see Jeremy saying, I too am extraordinarily humble. Good for you, Jeremy. And so there's something that in that dialogue, in that discourse with the donor, and in all the interactions leading up, there is both art and science in the demonstration of you're earning the authority from the donor. It's one thing to have organizational credibility, or maybe your principal's a big wig, or you've got a killer board, but they're making a bet on you and you have to be worth what you ask for. So with that earned authority is also empathy, an ability to actually put yourself in somebody else's shoes. which prevents us from forcing an ask too early if we're truly empathizing, for getting down to the true diagnoses that a donor wants to hear. You know, if you're able to name the problems that the donor senses in their own life better than they are, or more acutely than they might be able to name, you've earned their trust, you've empathized, and you're building rapport. So I'm sure you guys are also familiar with Donald Miller. I think one of the best frameworks he came up with in framing a pitch or a presentation is to go through the philosophical, external, and internal issue that the donor might be facing. And you enter as the guide or the Virgil of the conversation to help that donor recognize the opportunity that they have for them, which is the hero role for them instead of the hero role for you, which again goes back to humility. So I'll say, oh, hey, Roger Patterson, I got to stop reading this thing. Anyway, those are just a couple thoughts.
Thank you. But yeah, so Roger's question here is a really good one. How much time should a CEO or president or executive director, who's ever in charge of the organization, how much time should they be spending on major gifts?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Sarah, if that's okay. A lot of people don't realize, I think, that, you know, they think, oh, this is great. Now I'm the CEO. I finally got to be the president, whatever it is. And now I get to actually, you know, do the thing that I'm passionate about, which is what I've always wanted, which is why I am now the CEO. Bad news. Most of your job is fundraising. That's an overstatement probably, but I would say that, you know, a good CEO is spending anywhere from, I would say a minimum would be 50 and up to 75. I mean, I don't think you can at more than 75 and you're probably dropping off other stuff, right? Because you've got a team to manage and an organization to run. But I do think about half of your time should be spent on fundraising. Now you need to be strategic about that. And that includes events, right? If you're like speaking at events and all of a lot of, you know, fundraising touches in a lot of different areas of nonprofit leadership, but there is nothing like having a meeting with the president of an organization, and the MGOs really need to be able to pull on that resource to bring someone in, you know, because you're going to get that donor who wants to meet with the president, who thinks that they deserve that peer-to-peer relationship, and you need to be able to pull on that when the occasion comes.
The only thing I'd add to that, Cecilia and Roger, from a solving perspective, is part of figuring out how to work with the CEO or principal of an org requires us to practice self-awareness and figure out, okay, where do I really contribute? If the role of a fundraiser is one of three things, and I think the all-star fundraisers can be all three, you're either a hunter, a farmer, or an engineer. So engineer being subject matter expert, farmer, you're excellent at cultivating relationships. Why are you laughing, Seals? And hunter, you're just ready to go out, make any cold call, take any meeting, and always prospecting and building out that part of the pipeline. And so if you know that you're strong on two, and your CEO, or maybe the hunter and farmer piece, and maybe the CEO is a subject matter expert, then you can manage up by positioning that CEO to play that role of kind of a knowledge source in a way that best optimizes time and meets the CEO as a customer and the donor as a customer where they are. I think in large part at the same time, you know, if you're in that kind of a leadership position and you're not willing to do the work of making a cold call every now and then, or writing the donor thank you notes, or going on meetings, and you find as a CEO that you're procrastinating in that role, then you're probably not in the right role. I myself have actually stepped away from working with people, whether it's clients or something else, when there's an unwillingness for the CEO to get involved. Because if the principal of an organization can't fundraise for it, I find it silly that person would try to hold anybody else accountable to do so, if I'm being frank.
Yeah, please do.
Absolutely.
I much prefer Frank to Sarah.
So, I mean, part of the point there, right, is the leader of the organization doesn't necessarily have to be the closer, the one sort of like actually making the ask or bringing the dollars in, but you have to be involved in the meetings. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think there are some relationships where you want, where that ask is better served to come from the president. I mean, figuring out who the right person is to make the ask is something that you should think about ahead of every meeting. Does it need to be me? Should it be the president? Does it actually need to be our mutual friend who's a board member? Should it, I mean, the first question is, should this meeting be an ask, right? And once you've decided that the meeting should be an ask, then you need to figure out who's going to make the ask and what the strategy is and at what point in the meeting. And, you know, the more you do it, the less time you need to spend kind of putting it all on paper and making sure you've gone over it and prepping it. But it is good to be prepared. And, you know, especially if you're starting out in major gifts, you want to be sitting down with a piece of paper ahead of every meeting and figuring out what you're trying to get out of it. What's the best possible outcome? What's the minimum acceptable outcome? And what's the strategy for getting one of those two things? Sorry, I kind of answered a bunch of questions. Sarah, I didn't.
No, that's great. Okay, so yeah, we have some questions here about meetings. I want to dig into meetings themselves. So you answered this, but let's back up a little bit. Should every meeting be an ask? Like, how do I know if a meeting was successful? What should my plan be going into a meeting?
Yes, every meeting should be an ask. No, I'm joking. I just wanted to say that. You know, if you're pushing an ask in every single meeting arbitrarily, then are you actually listening to the needs of the donor? I think it's foolish to offer a vision without first understanding somebody else's vision, because really the work that you're doing is not getting the money. The money piece is a byproduct of what happens when you're in right relationship with someone. So your job is to identify the intersection of where your vision, mission, strategy intersects with what they hope to see as far as social change or impact or all those other philanthropic buzzwords we use. What their vision is. It starts with them.
So let's talk about how you actually get a meeting. How does that happen, right? So I've got somebody giving me $1,000 a year, and I think that they could upgrade. What do I do? What's the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you've got someone so you said you have someone who's giving $1,000, right? So you've already, great. So they've made the initial gift. That's awesome. That's great news. Because it turns out if you can even just retain that donor, for 5 years, that gift will go up to a value of 165 lifetime giving. So if you get a donor who gives $1,000 the first time he gives to you, the 5-year value is over 160,000. So keep that in mind. This is why donor retention is really important. But yeah, so you've got your $1,000 donor. How do you go to the next level? By getting to know them. There's like communication is really the bottom line. Communication, cultivation. You want to be near, dear, and clear with your 1K plus donors. That means that they normally 1,000 is where you actually get to that point where you assign them to a portfolio. If you're a larger organization, $1,000 may be where they go into kind of a junior portfolio or like a fundraisers and training portfolio. That's also great, because the point is you want them to be assigned to someone who has the time and capacity and incentive to speak to them personally, to start cultivating that relationship, to listen to them. We want to find out $1,000 is a pretty substantive contribution. I mean, I think we know that 60% of Americans don't have $1,000 even just to cover an emergency medical expense. So if you have $1,000 and you're giving it to whatever charity sent you a letter, you are really putting yourself into a very specific category. And so it is well worth calling them. The first thing you do is you call them. They won't answer. You're going to leave a voicemail. Then you're going to send them an email. They might not answer. You're going to send them a letter. They probably won't answer. You're going to send them another email. They probably won't answer. The next time you're in St. Louis, I'm assuming they're in St. Louis. Most good people are, right, Sarah? Next time you're in St. Louis, you're going to call them and tell them you're coming to St. Louis and ask them for a meeting again. Eventually, 9 times out of 10, eventually you will get through. There is always that 1% of people who give to you and just simply refuse to have any part of being cultivated. This does happen, but you should not stop trying.
When do you stop following up?
I mean, I don't think you ever stop saying thank you, right? Especially if they continue to renew their gift.
Mm-hmm.
If when talking about going after a cold prospect who hasn't given yet, it really depends on the strength of the prospect, right? Is this someone that your board member has recommended and you know they have capacity and they've given, really like $100,000 to a sister organization? Then go after them, right? I usually do 3 follow-ups. So email, phone call, email, maybe throw in a letter, and then like wait a quarter and go back to them. If it was really just a cold prospect that someone handed to you and you have no connection to him, I don't know. Try twice, 3 times in a row and then move on. It depends on how busy you are.
Again,
You go.
No, I think, I love this question because I always think, making the ask has got to be the most difficult part. And then you're trying to get the meeting and you're thinking getting the meeting is the most difficult part. And then you get the commitment and you're like, getting this actual check in the door is the most difficult part. So it's all complicated, but it all requires the utmost persistence. And instead of kind of, just echoing Cecilia to illustrate her points, I'll give you two quick stories. One was with a donor in Wisconsin. It was a first time meeting. He had given $5,000. I had asked for 3 meetings. Finally, he said, yes, you only got 30 minutes. I sat down, gave him the pitch, brought my state director there, who was my kind of local subject matter expert. And he held up all this direct mail that we had sent him. And he said, why do you send me all this trash, for lack of a better word? And I explained to him, and I tried to explain to him. He interrupted, got a little angry. He's like, this is completely wasteful. And then I took a step back and explained our direct mail program, direct marketing, how it's not just a lead generation system, but it's actually now a profit center. I shared with him transparently what we invest in it versus what we get out of it. And I said, as a business owner, you might respect this strategy because you might be employing this very strategy elsewhere in your business. So we had a conversation about that. Anyways, the way that we ended the meeting is I asked him for $10,000 and told him I'd never come back again. It was a dead end, and I knew he was aligned with what we were doing. He was just annoyed, and he actually enjoyed that I tried to keep up with him. I was still listening to him. I got that check, and I made sure that he never received another piece of direct mail from us again. That was my promise to him, should he send that money in. He wrote it on the spot. Another getting a meeting, there's a gentleman based out of Chicago, high-level donor, and he would not reply to any of my emails, handwritten notes, meeting requests, anything. But I knew that he was giving to a great number of other organizations at a high level, and I thought that we were the best group that he could give to out of the types of groups that he was investing in. So I found this man happens to be really involved in golf programs, a program called First Tee program. So I found a fundraising letter that he had sent to my dad, because my dad's a huge golf nut. Took the letter, put it in a note, put it in a handwritten note, and addressed the note to him and said, you've been sending these letters to my dad for a long time. He's been contributing to your program. I played your golf courses. I've done this and that. I've been trying to get a meeting with you for 2.5 years now. And I'm trying to figure out why you won't take one with me. Would you just give me 30 minutes? And sure enough, he took the meeting. Never was able to upgrade him to the level that I wanted to, but he did become an annual giver, and gave because he believed in the mission and because he respected the fight and the persistence.
It's awesome. This is actually a really interesting question that we got ahead of time that you're touching here, Sarah. So you do get the meeting, right? You fight for, you get the meeting, the donor says you got 20 minutes. What do you do in 20 minutes? How do you prepare for a 20-minute meeting? How do you structure that? Assuming they don't derail it immediately by saying, here's a bunch of direct mail. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, often, actually more than often, in every single meeting, no matter the time frame that we set out, I start with a statement of reminding the donor, which I've already done in an email or a phone call ahead of time, why I'm here today. I want to continue this relationship, and you're also exploring if it's worth it to continue this relationship. And at the end of this meeting, we're both going to make a decision. Does that sound right to you? Does that sound like I'm here for the right reasons? Okay, here's what I'd hope to discuss with you today. Can you confirm that that's what you want to discuss today? Okay, let me dive in. I'm going to go through it in 10 minutes, and then you're going to tear it apart. I'm going to get your feedback and insights. That's typically a structure that works. When you offer it, you guys know better than most that donor meetings rarely ever go that linearly. So it's kind of like sometimes being on a bucking bronco and seeing how long you can hold on. And no matter how the meeting deviates or what rabbit trails you go on, getting to that point where it's like, well, I wanted to go back to the reason why I'm here today. And then if it's an appropriate opportunity to make an ask, say the reason that I wanted to be here was this. I hope it's not too presumptuous of me in 20 minutes to ask for this, but I would like you to consider this with your gift. We could accomplish Y.
I like that. Here's a very different question. So here's a group trying to raise $12 million And what they want to do is reach out to billionaires in Pennsylvania and ask them for $1 million towards this effort. So the goal is to send letters. What do you think? Is this a good strategy? Is it reasonable, or what would be a different or better way of getting to that $12 million goal?
I would not start by sending cold letters to billionaires. I will. So fun anecdote, just very quickly. One of my clients really felt like they needed to get some quick wins. So they put together a mailing, content was great. And they sent it to the Forbes 500 list. They put together all the names and the addresses and sent it. Did not get a single response. And that's because everyone in the world is going after billionaires. And you need to prove that you have something that's interesting to, first of all, you need to penetrate their consciousness, right? Sending a cold letter is not going to penetrate their consciousness. Having a mutual friend, having a friend of a friend who serves on a board with someone like you, these are some of the busiest, best gate kept people in the world are American billionaires. So you are going to have to you need to think through a really compelling strategy. It's going to involve natural partners, almost certainly. And then you need to think about, how am I going to pitch this to them? Like I need to, let's say you get a meeting, you have one shot. And I would say that you're not going to get a gift without a meeting. And you might have to sit down with philanthropic advisors or family offices first before you actually get to that donor. You may never get to that donor. Let's accept that. You may never. You may always be working with a philanthropic advisor. But I do not think that sending a letter cold to a billionaire will get you anything. And I would also say that, $1 million ask from anyone as a first time ask, I think that will come across as presumptuous. Because you haven't had the chance to sell them on your mission yet, on your vision. You're not going to be activating that identification. I think that it takes a little bit of time and cultivation to get to that identification response. And it's not going to happen in one letter. That's what I say. Now, Sarah's more aggressive. So Sarah, you tell me what you think.
Well, there was a time I remember when I called you and I said, Seals, I got a new project. I need a list of all the top Christian billionaires in the country. And you laughed and we worked on it together. And shortly after I was like, man, I'm breaking my own rules. There is a really particular scenario where if you're in startup mode and you're looking for capital investors, the seed funding, getting something off the ground, there is a window for engaging billionaires at a really high level that doesn't necessarily follow the normal trajectory for a major mega gift. That's not where I would recommend or advise a nonprofit begin diving in if it's building out for the long term. I think also depending on the degree of urgency of the mission, how political it is or isn't, et cetera, all those factors matter. But I've found that I always have the most successful fundraising year and the best sleep at night when I'm committed to diversifying the pipeline, which takes a lot more work than looking at a bunch of names that are household names. And you just, imagine that meeting and how it's going to go over and over and over again. It's putting all your eggs in one basket. And so I think figuring out how to get your reps in so that you as a fundraiser get those workouts in and become better and better before you meet with those top dogs. I think being able to solicit at every level matters and helps you develop your skill set.
Great point.
It's a good follow-up to that question that came in. So what if you've got somebody who has given in the past and isn't responding to meeting requests? Does it make sense to just send them a proposal for a renewal or maybe a slight upgrade?
These are Hail Marys.
Huh?
I would say that's a Hail Mary. Does it make sense? Yes. If you've got a donor who's gone dark on you and you can't get in front of them, you can't get a meeting, maybe it's a foundation, maybe it's just a regular donor and you just want to get something in. Yes, because sometimes you will get picked up occasionally. But if you're operating at the level where you have a target ask and an estimated revenue in your system, I would estimate that revenue at zero for the piece of your accountants. I would not plan on getting that.
Yeah, it's always about your relationship with that particular donor. So if you have local knowledge or relational history of why that might have happened, I think there's certainly an artful way to re-engage and to offer re-engagement. But this is another thing where Cecilia and I have tried this together when we were younger. Just doing the blanket blind thing isn't super effective.
Yeah, that makes sense. An earlier question we got here, which I am surprised is still a relevant question, but is a relevant question. About a year and a half ago, we started wondering whether you can make asks over Zoom if we can't do meetings. That's still the case in a lot of places for a lot of organizations. What do you think? Is it okay to make a $25,000 ask over a Zoom call to a donor?
Sarah, you take this one. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I've done it this month. And it depends on the temperament of the donor and the relationship again. It also depends on what kind of credibility you're able to bring to the call or the Zoom call. And I don't just mean yourself. If you're able to leverage some like incredible billionaire who's already on your side and maybe has given in the past and is willing to make a couple of calls, that's one way to do it. And everybody understands, oh, I get why this isn't an in-person meeting. But I think when you're getting to know someone, showing up when no one else is willing to show up is a key differentiator.
Okay. So when you do get the meeting, when you do show up, what should you take with you? Should you go in empty-handed? Should you take like a one-pager? Should you take a bunch of stuff, all your annual reports, collateral, newsletters? What do you recommend?
Seals?
Yeah, I talked about this specifically in my 5 ways to bomb a donor meeting article on Philanthropy Daily. You should take something to leave behind. And there's a couple of reasons. So don't take something ugly. Do not take your org's, annual budget that you just downloaded from QuickBooks on the way out. Like that's not that. Okay. If that's your option or nothing, then choose nothing. But it's great. You want something that looks pretty and speaks to the mission of your organization. So it could be a 1-pager. It could be if you're operating really high level, it's a nice folder with a 1-pager. Maybe there's a flyer about your legacy society. Maybe there's something about the next donor event that you're hosting. It's a charity golf event, whatever it is. You want to have something. There's two main reasons. One, most individual donors give as a unit. Those who are part of a marital relationship give together, and it's so much easier for the spouse that you met with to have something to take back to their husband or wife and say, hey, here are the materials, take a look. What do you think? Can we do this? Okay, that's one. And the other thing is, aside from the marital relationship, I have literally watched this happen where I've left behind a little folder with my business card and some information, and the guy has picked it up, walked down the hall, and given it to one of his buddies who shares the office space and is also a wealth advisor, right? So like a lot of times you've got these people who are they know one another. They know they're people who work on different floors. They're all at a certain socioeconomic level. It's great for them to be like, oh, my buddy, whatever, would love this. I'll take this over to him. And 3 things. Then they've got something on their desk. They may leave it there to start conversations. They may use it as a way to find out who else in their organization also is interested in a specific charity. So anyway, that's my 2 cents, 3 cents. Yes, leave something behind if it looks pretty and is about the mission of your organization.
I often tell myself in a donor meeting, when it perhaps isn't going the way that you had hoped or anticipated, I often tell myself that they're going to remember how I made them feel. They're not necessarily going to remember what I said. And so for that reason, I like to bring something a little bit more on the personal side. So if I bring an investor update, then I'll put a Post-it note and highlight or circle the one important data point or argument in the document that I think would be most relevant to that donor, or I'll bring an article and put it inside and say, hey, I thought I cut this article out for you, and I'll let it look like I just tore it out of a newspaper or something like that, so it doesn't look like overly prepared. This is a technique JP de Gans taught us. Or maybe that's how I remember it after doing all those mailings and
Yeah.
cutting thousands of newspapers in 2014. The other piece had something else there that I thought might be helpful.
I mean,
Uh,
absolute minimum, leave your business card, right? Do not walk out of a donor meeting without giving them information about how to get in touch with you.
Yeah, oh yeah. I think it's more important to leave with a commitment of how you're going to follow up and when.
Oh, yes, for sure. For
Then,
sure.
and I think this is also why it's great to have a purse, because you can keep a lot of different files in a purse and not be that person that walks in with a binder and too much information. And this person is like, already too much. I already don't like you. So,
That's why I always take my purse to donor meetings, Sarah.
as you should.
I like your point about the ripped out article. One really good tip I heard once is scheduling reminders to send casual text to donors. So it's planned casual, but so you give donors a feeling that that you're always thinking about them, or like you look up an article that Sarah would find interesting and say, hey, Sarah, I just came across this, was thinking of you. And so they think, you play up this really personal feel. Related to that, here's a question I like. The first donor meeting I ever went to was with one person. I went with the president, the vice president, a program person, and myself. It was very low level. It was 4 of us meant to meet with one person. That felt odd to me. What's your recommendation? How many people should go to a meeting with a single donor?
Sarah, you go first.
4 feels like a crowd. And if that's not at a bar or a restaurant, that's overwhelming. I think I prefer to bring one other person. I feel like 3 is too much and overkill, and it might show I'm not confident enough to handle this meeting on my own. Usually the usual trajectory for building a donor relationship on the cultivation intro side, I like to do a meeting by myself, and then I like to take somebody else with me and then make the ask in that second meeting. But I would be hard pressed to figure out, if it's not a small event or a happy hour, why 4 people would need to be there.
That makes sense.
Completely with Sarah on that. 2
Okay,
feels.
right at the end, Celia, you told us in Philanthropy Daily how to bomb a donor meeting. Let's end quickly. One or both of you, I would love to hear a story about a meeting that went terribly wrong. And if you managed to salvage it, what did you do?
Well, excellent question. I have one story that I will lead with, and this is, I am truly bearing my soul here to all of you, because this is the worst thing that ever happened to me. I didn't bomb the meeting, but I bombed a meeting request. We were hosting an event, and one of the attendees who was coming was a foundation representative. The foundation was giving us 6 figures a year, which I had cultivated, and I was really excited that he was going to be there. And I was lying in bed. Here's the lesson: do not send emails to donors on your phone when you're lying in bed. So I'm lying in bed. I'm like, I'm just going to shoot this message off to him and ask him for it. So I said, hey Dan, I'm so glad that you're going to be at this event. I was hoping that I could buttonhole you for a minute at some point during the event for a private update with one of our with someone from our leadership team. Just wanted to have a chance to touch base with him separately from the rest of the event. And I CC'd the member of our events team who was facilitating the individual meetings. And she wrote back with a question mark. And I thought, why was this confusing? So I went back and reread the email. And it turns out that when I wrote buttonhole, I had left off the ON, which is really important in the word buttonhole. And I don't think I slept that night. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had just sent a horrible message to a major donor. And incredibly, I did get the meeting. No one ever mentioned it. We never spoke of it again. He wrote back to he started a new email thread and responded and said, that sounds great. Looking forward to it. And yeah, we never spoke of it, and the relationship ended up being fine and surviving. So that's my meeting. That's my story. That's how you bomb an ask for a meeting. Don't do that.
Yeah. Always proofread emails.
Proofread emails.
Twice.
Proofread your emails.
Yep. I've been in, man, I've made so many mistakes, but I've been in meetings where I've asked for too little and asked for way too much. And seeing that shock on a donor's face is just the worst feeling. But one interaction that stands out in particular, and I'll keep it pretty vague, but we had a board meeting where Mr. David Koch was involved. There was discussion during the board meeting around what his gift, his donation would be that year, where it would be designated. And the board meeting did not go well. There were a number of different factors at play, but after the board meeting, it was the sort of thing where other board members were coming up and being like, "Are you okay?" And we had a donor event for all donors giving 250,000 and above. Were coming into DC that night to have a big donor event with Mr. Koch. We convinced him to stay for the event. He was going to leave. And what ended up happening is I played him a song on guitar that I had written for him for his birthday. And after that song, and it was one of the scariest moments of my life, because I'm running the donor event and I know we don't have the alignment with Mr. Koch that we had hoped we would have at that point in time. And that it's going to be my problem. It is my problem. And I've got to turn the boat around and I don't know how to. So we had scheduled this in the programming. After the board meeting went poorly, they said, we're going to pull this. And at the last minute, I went over to our COO and CEO and said, kind of put me back in the game. I got to do this. I think it's going to work. And just let him know how we see him and distract him from the, not distract, but remind him of how much we care about him as a person. So played the song for him and he stood up afterwards. He's laughed like a hyena. And so he stood up and did his like, sort of laugh and gave me a huge hug and said, that was the nicest thing anybody's ever done for me. And I thought I was going to pass out, but we found alignment with him after taking that risk. I don't think it's something I will ever do again, but it happened.
That's amazing. I've never heard of somebody playing a song that they wrote for a donor, but I'm glad it worked.
A little ridiculous, yeah.
Well, Celia and Sarah, thank you so much. This is super helpful. Thanks everybody for joining us. If you want to get a little more into the details of Major Gifts fundraising, on September 23rd, we have a masterclass with American Philanthropics Ben Domingue and Andy Day of Focus, the Fellowship of Christian University Students, I think. The two of them sit down. These are 3-hour courses over Zoom, but not a webinar, a tight meeting with about 15 people to get into the trenches, roll up your sleeves and really work on understanding how do we plan for Major Gifts? How do we do Major Gifts fundraising well? I just dropped a link in the chat box. You can see it there. Learn more. I'll send it in a follow-up email. My email is also there if you have any follow-up questions. The last thing I want to offer, even further than 3 hours, in Denver on September 15th through September 17th, we'll have a 3-day in-person training. This is our Elements of Fundraising training. It's American Philanthropics full, comprehensive, A to Z, everything you do with fundraising. You can reach out to me with any questions about that. Again, the link is in the chat. Again, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Celia. And thanks everybody for being with us. We'll send you a recording soon. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.